All right, so we are picking up in Daniel chapter 5 tonight. And if you remember back to the last chapter, chapter 4 was kind of an unusual chapter because King Nebuchadnezzar essentially wrote the whole chapter, and it's sort of his testimony of getting a warning in a dream, and that God was going to humble him, and then him sort of ignoring the warning, letting his pride get the better of him, and then the actual process of God humbling him, taking away his reason, and him living like a wild animal, and then God's restoration, bringing his reason back to him. And so that's where we left off. Now, in chapter 5, we're going to pick up with a different king, King Belshazzar. King Belshazzar was once thought by historians to historians used to not really have a reference for who King Belshazzar was, and they doubted the book of Daniel because of his inclusion. All that was known is that King Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon before the kingdom's defeat by the Persian Empire. Recently, there have been discoveries that have pointed out who Belshazzar is. But before we get to that, I'll just give you the rundown on what happened after Nebuchadnezzar's death. So Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 43 years and then died. He was succeeded by his son, Evil-Merodach. And Evil-Merodach ruled for 2 years. His claim to fame was, or at least from our perspective, from biblical perspective, is that he freed King Jehoiachin, and who had been kept imprisoned. So after 2 years of reigning, he was assassinated by Nebuchadnezzar's son-in-law, a guy named Neriglissar. Neriglissar ruled for 4 years and seems to have died a natural death. His son, Labroso-Arkad, something like that, no idea how to pronounce that, ruled for 9 months, and he was beaten to death by a gang that included Nabonidus. Nabonidus was another son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was thought to be the last king of Babylon. Now, recently, there were some records called the Nabonidus cylinders. These were cylindrical records written in cuneiform, and they record the reign of his son Belshazzar. Now, for the last 14 years of Nabonidus's reign, Belshazzar was his co-regent. And in fact, Nabonidus left Babylon for an extended amount of time while Belshazzar reigned in the city of Babylon. And he only returned when Cyrus and the Persians were about to invade the city. And so this chapter 5, records the very last night before the invasion by Cyrus. So that's where we pick up Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God which was in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So Nebuchadnezzar had taken the consecrated vessels from the temple at some point during the long siege of Jerusalem, and he just put them away somewhere. Now his grandson Belshazzar went a step beyond and committed sacrilege with these vessels and took these consecrated vessels out and just had a wild party and used the temple vessels to praise the gods, to praise the gods of his pantheon that he worshipped, these gods represented by idols. This was all happening while Cyrus was getting ready to invade Babylon. The ancient historians tell us that Cyrus used a pretty ingenious strategy to break through the walls of Babylon with basically without any fighting. He and his men diverted the Euphrates River from where it ran under the walls of the city. They diverted it into a lake bed. And once the level of the river was low enough, Cyrus and his soldiers just waded right under the walls, and they were right in the middle of the city. These walls were probably about 17 miles long, 22 feet thick, and 90 feet high. I think it's a very interesting picture of our present day that Belshazzar was surrounded by this illusion of safety, and he distracted himself while the city was being defeated at that very moment. I think this is a very apt word for our day. There's such an illusion of safety, and hopefully it's not just an illusion. Hopefully we don't face horrible dangers anytime soon, but there's perhaps never been so much potential for dangers. We've just seen demonstrated by modern weaponry and sort of new ways of new types of weapons, drone weapons that can be sort of smuggled in very cheaply and cause a lot of damage, really difficult to address. There's never been so much danger. There's never been so much spiritual danger either. In terms of our culture, in terms of our institutions, there is an assault on God's truth. Mm-hmm. There have also never been so many distractions as there are today. Most of us carry a little distraction machine in our pockets. There is great danger, there's a great temptation to distract ourselves from that danger, just as Belshazzar did. And so I think this is a good warning that we would not be like him, the ones who distract ourselves when the Persians are walking right under the wall. All right, verse 5. Suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. The king called aloud to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, "Any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. So Belshazzar couldn't read the writing on the wall, but he knew it wasn't good for him. And his wise men couldn't read it either. Why do you suppose they couldn't read the writing on the wall? That's definitely a possibility. The words are in Aramaic, but this whole chapter is in Aramaic, so it's quite possible Daniel might have translated them from Hebrew to Aramaic. Yeah, I think it's kind of an open question why they couldn't read it, why none of the wise men were able to read Hebrew. I don't know how different. I know Hebrew and Aramaic are very similar languages. I don't know how different their ancient scripts were. So maybe there's an explanation there. For whatever reason, King Belshazzar couldn't read it. The wise men couldn't read it. It alarmed him even more when none of them could read it. Verse 10, the queen entered the banquet hall because the words of the king and his nobles. The queen spoke and said, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There's a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation." All right, so the queen shows up and has some wisdom for Belshazzar. Now this is possibly the queen, possibly the queen mother, who would be Belshazzar's mom, Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. But in any event, she remembers Nebuchadnezzar's reign better than he does, and she remembers, oh, there's this guy Daniel who can interpret dreams. Notice this pattern repeats here, right? There's something confusing that happens. We need wisdom. Who do we call first? Well, calling all the pagan wise men first. And if they still can't figure it out, what do we do? And then somebody remembers, oh, hey, let's call Daniel. Let's use God's wisdom as our last resort. And so that's what they're going to do. You think Daniel will know? Verse 13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now I have heard about you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Just now the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, that they might read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me. But they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now if you're able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me. You will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. All right, so Belshazzar says, if you can interpret this, I'm going to promote you, he says, to third ruler in the kingdom. Now, the historical records explain why that is, right? First ruler is Nabonidus, second ruler is Belshazzar, very next one is third, and he's offering it to Daniel. Verse 17. Then, sorry, I lost my place. Verse 13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished, he killed, and whomever he wished, he spared alive, and whomever he wished, he elevated, and whomever he wished, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of beasts, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this, but you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand. But the God in whose hand are your life breath and all your ways you have not glorified. Then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out. First off, do you notice there's a bit of a difference in how Daniel addresses Belshazzar, and there's even a difference in how he addresses Belshazzar, and then when he starts to talk to him about Nebuchadnezzar. We don't get very much of a sense for what Belshazzar is like, but I sense here a real disdain for him, in that while Nebuchadnezzar was a man who was filled with pride, he was a strong king, and he was a king who God was ultimately able to humble and restore. Belshazzar seems to be a different sort of man who just look at Daniel's first response to him: keep your gifts for yourself or give your rewards to someone else. I don't want what you're giving me. And how long is that position of third in the kingdom going to last? A few hours. All this world can give us, likewise, fleeting. So fleeting. And so Daniel's heart is not moved by something that he's probably recognizing is not going to last very long. Let our hearts not be moved by things that are passing away either. And so look at what Daniel says to Belshazzar. He tells him this whole story about Nebuchadnezzar being humbled before him. And then he says, verse 22, yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. And he concludes this by saying, this is the later part of verse 23, but the God in whose hand are your life breath and all your ways, you have not glorified. The fact is, we owe God our worship. We owe the true God our worship. Even those who do not know the name of God, they were created by him and were created in his image, and they also owe him their worship. I heard a really great old sermon, I think from like the 60s, and it's this kind of scratchy, crackly old recording, but it's this teacher named Paris Reedhead, who had been a missionary, and he said his motivations for becoming a missionary is because he wanted to save the poor, innocent natives from the wrath of God, that they were such poor victims, they had never heard the name of Christ, and that wasn't their fault. He got there and he realized that they were sinners just like everyone else, and that the purpose of bringing the gospel to the world is not out of pity. It's not because they deserve another chance. It's because God deserves their worship. It's because God created them in his image. Jesus Christ purchased them with his blood, and he deserves to hear their voices praising him, just as he deserves to hear our voices praising him. Verse 25. Now this is the interpretation, or this is the inscription that was written out. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. So literally this says numbered, weighed, divided. And Daniel interprets it for him. Verse 29, then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. That night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. That very night, Belshazzar, who thought he had in his power the ability to desecrate things that God had sanctified, Belshazzar, who thought he had the right to give somebody the third place in the kingdom, that very night, he was slain. Verse 31, so Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Now, Darius the Mede is another guy who we don't quite know where to connect him to ancient history. And in the case of Darius, there haven't been any recent discoveries that have shed light on this. There's a few possibilities, and they all sort of hinge on the point that Darius was a name of several later rulers of the Persian Empire, and it was an assumed name, It was probably functioning as a title as well as a name. And so Darius could have been several people. Some have suggested that he was possibly Cyrus himself, just going under a title of Darius. And that would explain some references to Darius seeming to make decisions on behalf of the whole Persian Empire. Another possibility is that he was the son of Cyrus Cambyses. And that would make sense because Cambyses was later on after Babylon was conquered, he was sort of a governor over Babylon under his father. The thing that I think disputes both of those possibilities is that Darius is referred to as a Mede and Cyrus is referred to as a Persian in Daniel. So I really don't think Darius is either Cyrus or Cyrus's son. The possibility that that I favor is that this was a general who served under Cyrus and was largely responsible for the invasion of Babylon. This is a man who's elsewhere known as Gubaru or Gobrias, and he immediately took the authority over Babylon after it was conquered and ruled there for a short amount of time. So that is who I think Darius is historically. So that's where we'll end chapter 5. Does anyone have any thoughts on that chapter before we go on?
Well, there's a real similarity between the name that the king had given Daniel and the name that he gave his son
Yeah.
or grandson. I'm not sure, but do you know what the names mean, or like why? Do you have any idea like why he named Daniel a name so similar to?
Yeah. Okay. So I have somewhere the meaning of of Belshazzar, Daniel's other name. Bel was the name of a Babylonian god, and Belteshazzar was Belteshazzar means Bel's prince. I would guess there's a similar meaning for Belshazzar. This my app doesn't give an interpretation. Oh, here we go. It doesn't interpret it. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Sad for those guys to get these names because I think all the names are kind of like not good names, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be I wouldn't like that if every time I heard my name it was a reminder that that was under the thumb of a pagan king and who's trying to give me the identity of his gods. That'd be a pretty gross thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, chapter 6. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So Daniel's already one of 3 who rule over these 120 satraps, and the king is, and he starts distinguishing himself even beyond that exalted level of leadership. And so Darius starts planning to just put him in charge over everybody. Verse 4, then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Then these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows: King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is the injunction. So first, I think it's pretty incredible that Daniel, the very thing that caused Daniel to be promoted also made him a target. It was his faithfulness, is the fact that God gave him favor as well. And the other commissioners and satraps were jealous of him and began to plot against him, and they could find no fault in him after 50 years in government service. Do you think you could find a politician who's been in office for 50 years who has no dirt on him? Well, that was the case with Daniel. They could find no fault in him, and they said, where's the one place we'll be able to find fault?
His faithfulness to God.
Yeah. It's if we force him to choose between obeying God and obeying the law, he's going to choose to obey God. His only fault is that from their perspective, he's too faithful to God. Reminds me of what the apostles said in Acts chapter 5, verses 27 to 31, talk about how they were out preaching the gospel, they were out preaching Jesus, and the high priest took them and said, hey, I thought we warned you not to do this. And they said, we must obey God rather than men. We must obey God rather than men. And so my prayer is that's what would be said of us, is that, well, if you're going to find any fault in them, it's that they are too faithful to God. And so that was a pretty cunning thing that they did. The other cunning thing is they played on Darius's pride. They said, people can only make supplication to you. Verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that the document... one other comment before we get to verse 10. It says, by the law of the Medes and Persians, the writings of the king can't be changed. The laws of the king can't be revoked. And so we notice also that there's a bit of a different flavor to this kingdom versus Babylon. You got the sense under Babylon, particularly under Nebuchadnezzar, the king's will is whatever he says it is. If he wants it to be different today versus tomorrow, that's up to him. In the Medo-Persian Empire, there appears to be something more like a constitutional monarchy, where he's sort of bound by these overarching rules that that govern what kind of laws he can make. All right, verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? The king replied, the statement is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Then they answered and spoke before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah. They answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Then as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, recognize, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So what's going on? Daniel is praying 3 times a day with his windows open, facing Jerusalem, and these conspirators noticed that was his habit, and they knew the integrity of Daniel, that he wouldn't stop even if there was a law against it. Daniel was praying biblically. In 1 Kings chapter 8, in verse 30, Solomon is dedicating the temple, and he prays. And he's praying, and he asks God if the people are exiled and they turn toward this temple and pray, hear their request. And so Daniel is praying biblically. And so what can stop Daniel from praying? Well, not the threat of death. That's pretty amazing. I'm ashamed to tell you that there are many things that have kept me from focused prayer. Sometimes I think I'm too busy, or there's a distracting noise, or something has happened and I think it's a better use of my time to worry than to pray. There's all kinds of things that have kept me from praying, but nothing, even up to and including the threat of death, being ripped limb from limb by lions, is going to keep Daniel from a time of focused prayer humbly before the Lord on his knees. Daniel was certainly busy managing the affairs of the kingdom as one of 3 overseeing all these satraps. He was too busy not to pray, not too busy to pray. You might say the danger of this king's decree was too great for Daniel to pray under threat of death. Well, Daniel would say the danger is too great not to pray. And so he continued in focused, intentional, humble prayer 3 times a day. Verse 16, then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet ring of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. So we see a few things here. Daniel was known to Darius to serve God continually. That was his reputation and his pattern of life, serving God continually. And not only that, the pattern of his life, the testimony of his actions, inspired faith in King Darius. What does Darius say here? Your God, whom you serve continually, will himself deliver you. Isn't that amazing? Darius has faith that a God he doesn't even believe in is going to deliver Daniel. And so Daniel spends the night in the lion's den. Darius spends the night awake, fasting, fretting. Now, Daniel doesn't tell us if he slept at all, but, I kind of picture him, using one of the lions as a pillow, just snoring. I don't know. But it's kind of interesting. Maybe Daniel prayed Psalm 22, verse 21. It says, save me from the lion's mouth, from the horns of the wild oxen, you answer me. So there's a prayer for just about everything in Psalms. In any event, verse 19, then the king arose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime. Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted his God. Then the king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. That last verse is the one that doesn't always get covered in Sunday school. But King Darius goes to the lion's den, and he again shows that that Daniel has inspired faith in him. He does something that looks a little crazy. He goes to the lion's den expectantly, expecting Daniel to be okay. Apart from the power of God, that makes no sense. It's a testament to his faith that he's not ashamed to believe in something that doesn't make sense from a human perspective. It only makes sense according to the power of God. And so Daniel says that God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth. And so they take Daniel out, toss in the conspirators, and you see the brutality of this culture, right? Where they throw their whole families in there, but this is a pattern we see often in Scripture that we saw it in the book of Esther. Psalm 7, verses 15, 16 speaks of those, the wicked plotting, digging a pit and themselves falling into the very pit that they dug for somebody else. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, the same will he reap." And so, so often, those who plot evil things are taken out by their own evil. All right, verse 25. Then Darius the king wrote to all the people, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land, "May your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and enduring forever. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian." So we see here again a proclamation from a king. This time it's a proclamation from King Darius, who recognizes no other God could do what the true and living God has done in rescuing Daniel. And again, here we see the this pattern, just as we saw with the fiery furnace, that sometimes we're going to get singled out for all the wrong reasons, right? Because like Daniel, people are going to be jealous that our faithfulness gives us favor wherever we're planted, and we might even wind up in the lion's den. And in fact, even if God doesn't deliver us from the lions the way he delivered Daniel, he is still sovereign. He is still faithful to take our souls to safety. But God does have the power to close the mouths of the lions. And I don't know if that's a fun night in the lion's den, even with the mouths of the lions closed by the angel. But God is faithful to deliver through the trial. All right. Any thoughts on that chapter before we get into the next?
Just that it's interesting how King Darius was set up. The governors and satraps, made a statue and or had a statue made and had it worshipped basically by everyone, and how that flattered King Darius and set him up for a huge fall, with pride.
Yeah.
And I love what it says in verse 14. It says, "And the king, when he heard these words, that Daniel did not bow down, that he was greatly displeased with himself." Because he saw that what his pride and allowed him to get into a situation where he was distraught.
Yeah.
And I there's Daniel on the positive side. and really a warning about King Darius on the negative side, how pride can set us up for a fall.
Yeah, that's so true. All right, let's get a little bit into chapter 7. Chapter 7 begins sort of a new section in the book of Daniel. The first 6 chapters are more of a narrative. Chapters 7 through 12 are going to be records of visions and prophecies that Daniel receives. So, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. It was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had its back 4 wings of a bird, had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. All right, so these are 3 beasts. I'm going to spoil this a bit and say that these 3 beasts and then the 4th represent 4 world ruling empires. And we're actually going to see a lot of parallels between this prophecy and the vision of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2. So the first beast is a lion, or a winged lion. This represents Babylon. In fact, Babylon had a lot of winged lion statues as kind of a national symbol. Now the lion's wings are plucked, and it's stood up like a man, given the mind of a man. This is possibly speaking of the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar. The bear represents the Persian Empire, and a bear is sort of more crushing kind of predator, and it said to the bear in verse 5, Arise, devour much meat. And the bear has 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. Very likely the 3 ribs represent the Persian Empire's victories over Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. All right, the next beast, the leopard, represents the next world ruling empire, which was Greece, which conquered much of the known world under Alexander. Now, succeeding Alexander, the Empire of Greece was split into 4 parts under 4 rulers: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. The ones we care about are Seleucus and Ptolemy. The Seleucid kingdom ruled in the Middle East, sort of modern day Syria. The Ptolemies ruled in Egypt, and they had sort of a tug of war over Israel in the middle. So those are the ones we care about. All right. So that's probably the 4 heads. 4 heads represent the four rulers. All right. Verse 7. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boast. All right, so this fourth beast is sort of not given a comparison with an animal. It's unlike the others. It's dreadful and terrifying. There's several references to iron, and if you remember back to the statue vision in chapter 2, that the legs and the feet of the statue were iron. The feet also had clay mixed in with the iron. So, and this is representing Rome, this strongest of the ancient empires, and the with the most expansive dominion. In the vision of the statue, the rule of Rome was divided into 2 parts: the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay. Here, they're not those 2 phases of the Roman Empire are not separated from each other. It's kind of all one piece. It's this terrifying beast with 10 horns, and I think there's a pretty obvious connection here between the 10 horns and the 10 toes. These 10 horns represent 10 kings. Now, even though this beast does not make a distinction between ancient Rome and a future kingdom under 10 kings, there was not historically in ancient Rome a time when 10 kings ruled over the kingdom. And so that aspect of this prophecy is likely still future. There's 10 horns. Now there's an 11th, while he's watching this terrifying beast, an 11th horn sprouts out, a little horn, and pulls 3 out by the root. This horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boast. So this is probably an 11th king. Who do you suppose this is?
Antichrist.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is an end times world ruling empire with some connection to Rome, with 10 kings ruling over it, and then the Antichrist arising out of that system. There's a parallel in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 1. There's a beast who comes out of the sea, and that beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. Anyway, there's still sort of this similar picture of this beast as an end times world ruling empire, and that's the connection to the book of Revelation. All right, verse 9. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. Then I kept looking because because of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. All right, so Daniel sees in his vision the throne of the Ancient of Days. Who's the Ancient of Days? Jesus, God. I'm gonna say that the Ancient of Days is God the Father on his throne, and you'll see why I'm saying that in a minute. Not saying I'm necessarily right about that, but this sets up a really interesting picture as we keep going. But we see God in power over the over all of history, ruling over history, ruling over this beastly picture of an end times world ruling empire. See verses 11 and 12, the beast was slain, the other beast's dominion was taken away. But extension of life was granted. All right, verse 13. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. So we have two divine beings here. We have God seated on a throne of fire, and then we have one like a son of man, one who looks human, but he's coming on the clouds, and he rules over all, and everyone worships him. These are divine prerogatives. There is there's an argument that a triune understanding of God is something that was only revealed in the New Testament. And I want to say that passages like this one argue that God was always understood to be, if he was not clearly understood to be triune, he was at least always understood in the prophets to be complex in his unity, meaning that we see God as God the Father and God the Son presented here, two persons, both displaying the attributes of God. It's kind of interesting. You see here the throne of fire, and then the Son of Man coming on the clouds. This is similar to the imagery of the Exodus, the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. The Son of Man comes on the clouds, with the clouds of heaven, one like a Son of Man was coming. In the Old Testament, God rides the clouds. We find this in Psalm 104, verse 3. One of the commentators says it's mentioned like 70 times in the Old Testament, God riding the clouds. In Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 26, it says, "There is none like your God who rides the heavens." And so God alone rides the clouds. Now, why am I belaboring this point? Well, because this connects to something that I think is very interesting in the Synoptic Gospels. In Luke chapter 21, verse 27, Jesus is standing before the high priest. And I should say, up to this point, throughout his ministry, Jesus would over and over refer to himself as the Son of Man. It was his favorite title for himself. And it conveys a humility, a humbling of himself to empty himself of his divine, the display of his divine attributes at all times, right? To look like he's limited and human. And so it sounds like a title emphasizing his humanity, and it is, but we get to this point in Luke chapter 21, verse 27. He's standing on trial before the high priest, and he again uses this term, the Son of Man. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Oh, sorry, this is the prophecy of his return, but he uses the same language of the Son of Man coming in a cloud, speaking to the high priest. And it's this dramatic revelation that Son of Man is not just a humble title of humanity. It is also a claim to deity, saying Jesus was claiming to be the Son of Man in Daniel, who comes on the clouds and receives worship and has dominion over all. All right, verse 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of all these things. These great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. So I already spoiled the fact that these are four kings, but the whole point of this is that God wins. Verse 19, then I desired to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. So this is kind of interesting. He asks about that 11th horn that uprooted 3 of the others, the Antichrist. And it seems that while he's asking for this interpretation, it seems like this vision is still going. And so earlier he said that 11th horn was a little horn, but now it's bigger than all the others. And it's waging war on them, waging war on the saints. Or verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit in judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Highest One. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming to me, and my face grew pale, and I kept the matter to myself. So he gives them the interpretation of the dream, and I'm not going to go over it again because I kind of spoiled it already. But he connects this to a period of time. He says time, times, and half a time. And this is generally interpreted to be time, 1 year, times 2 years, and then half a time, half a year, so 3.5 years. This connects this period of the Antichrist making overt warfare against God's people to the second half of the 7 years of great tribulation upon the earth. And then after that, 3.5 years of open persecution, Jesus will defeat him. So that's where we'll end. I apologize for going a little long tonight. Anyone have anything that stood out to you in these chapters, or anything the Lord spoke to you tonight?
Even so, Lord Jesus.
Amen. Maranatha. All right, let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for your goodness to us, to make known your plan for the future, that we wouldn't live in fear, but that we would live in faith, in your faithfulness to deliver. And Lord, we do look forward to your return. We look forward to seeing you face to face. Pray that you would continually turn our hearts to wait and watch for your return. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.